is morning already. It is good to see you guys, to be here again for Man Up, and I just love I love that we have so many engaged men at the pasture. That's a big deal, and so when we can get together, try to encourage each other a little bit, I think that's obviously valuable. But I'll be honest with you, this morning, I feel like as a church we're at a little bit of an inflection point. As a ministry, we are 6.5 years old as a church, which is, when you think about that, pretty incredible to see what God has done in these 6.5 years. But we are transitioning from a group of people that enjoyed gathering under the oaks in the pasture at Jim and Lisa Lavender's place to a church of many hundreds of people where week in and week out it gets harder and harder to get a fist bump with everybody. When I'm signing birthday cards, I have to have Facebook open so I know who it is that I'm actually signing a card for. And some of that's great, some of it not so great, doesn't feel great. But it's where we are. And it was interesting, not long ago, some of the women from our church were at a conference down at the Church of 1122 in Jacksonville. Joby Martin is the pastor of that mega ministry. We've done some of his studies here before, and a couple of our ladies, actually after the Sunday morning service, got in line to meet and talk with Joby and Gretchen Martin down there. And these two ladies in particular, no surprise to me, began to tell Joby about the pasture and how we started and where we've come to at this point and how many people are in attendance and all these things. And it got Joby's attention because, he was there. He founded the Church of 1122. I think they're 14 or 15 years old now, something like that. But he was recalling the time when 1122 was kind of growing through that same transitional period that we find ourselves in as the pasture. And he made an interesting and compelling statement to them. He said, your church, the pasture, is at a place where it's either going to rocket into the future or it's probably going to begin to die a slow and painful death, or maybe devolve at least into just kind of the status quo. And I thought, that's a burden, honestly, that I've been feeling for a couple of years. So how do we get on that rocket that takes us into the future? And it's not about building numbers, although I've grown less and less averse to numerical growth in our church. And I'll just tell you why. I just feel like we need to minister to whomever God brings to us, right? So if he decides he wants to bring 700 people to the pasture, then we'll minister to 700 people. If it's 1,400, we'll minister to 1,400. If he takes us down to 300, you probably need to fire me and get a different pastor, but then go ahead and minister to those 300. It's not about the numbers, but the number will be whatever the number is. What I'm more concerned about as the pastor is how we're growing, not in breadth, but in depth. And guys, it starts with the men. If you win the man, you win the home. If the men are engaged, the church will thrive. This is the nature of what God designed for us. And so this morning is sort of a launch pad sermon. You can call it a sermon if you want, I guess. it's going to launch us into something more. We've actually scheduled, and I know this is very impromptu, very sort of last minute, but we've scheduled some Mondays for Men beginning in July. Well, we're going to follow up on a lot of the more detailed points of this, so the challenge for us will be to be there. I know it's summer. I know things are busy. I know our tendency in most churches is to just sort of draw back and coast, but Jesus isn't seasonal, right? So we're just going to plow ahead and encourage everybody that can participate to be there and to engage and to allow the transformational work of the Holy Spirit to do what it does in our lives so that we can be who God has designed us as men to be, right? So that's where we're going with all of this, all right? We're going to be in 2 Timothy 2 ultimately, so if you've got a paper copy of the Bible, please have a seat, Jeff. You can turn there. If you got the Wi-Fi code right, you can navigate there, whatever. We'll get there eventually, 2 Timothy 2 this morning. But I kind of want to start this morning with something that maybe is a little bit uncomfortable for us to own, to think about. I want to talk about the gap. Not the store, not the gap in your finances, not the gap between where you thought your career would be and where it actually is, although that might be reality for a lot of us, right? Now, the gap I want to talk about this morning is the gap between being male, which we are, okay? We don't need to debate this. Hello, America. 2 genders. This is where we're at. We don't need any other nonsense. By the way, that's a strategic ploy of the devil, what he's making people believe about, what does James Tallarico say? There's like 6 genders. I don't know what planet you're from, bro. There's 2, okay? But I want to talk about the gap between being male and being a man. There's a difference. There's a difference. Most of us, I think if we're honest, and I mean honest in the way that you're honest at 1:30 in the morning when it's just kind of you and the ceiling, you can't sleep and you're thinking about things. I think if we're honest, most of us know that there's a version of ourselves that we were meant to become. And again, in full honesty, I think probably most of us are not sure that we're there yet. In fact, many of us are probably not even sure if we're on the right path, on the right road toward that. You're a male, that's biology, right? Maybe you didn't do good in biology in school, that's okay, just take my word for it. You're a male. You didn't earn that. You didn't get a say in that. You didn't cultivate that. It happened at conception. Okay, if you've got questions about that, see Jeff afterwards. You were conceived and then, boom, you showed up. At least that's the man version of it. It's good to be a man, by the way, when it comes to that. So biologically, we're males. That's an easy fact to establish. But gentlemen, being a man is something that's entirely different than being a male. And I'm not talking, when we talk about manhood, I'm not talking about your hobbies, right? You got manly hobbies like, or potato guns or, other things that guys without jobs do. I'm talking about your hobbies. I'm not talking about, the cool truck you drive that's lifted, or maybe, Johnny has left his mark outside Green Gables, and as soon as it starts to fade, he'll make another mark with the old burnout machine, right? That's manly, we think. That seems manly. I'm not talking about those hobbies. I'm not talking about owning a truck. I'm not talking about knowing how to change your own oil. Changed the oil on my son's truck with my son, Mark, for the first time like last weekend. And I thought, okay, where have I been his whole life that I haven't even shown him how to change the oil? But we got it done. And you knew he was a rookie because he had more oil on his arm than was in the engine when we were done. But I'm not talking about that. That's not manhood. I'm not talking about your firm handshake. Some of you in here shake hands so hard, it's like, okay, are you compensating for something? Are you trying to hurt me physically? I don't know. That's not it either. I'm not talking at all about the cultural costume that we paste onto masculinity and then call it identity. I've been in ministry for 30 years, and I've seen a lot of things in men. And this may be hard for us to admit or to hear, but I'm going to say it because this is what I have observed, and you probably have too. Here it is. Most men have never been equipped. They were never shown how. Right? Not by their fathers, not by their churches, not by their coaches or their culture. In fact, the culture kind of took a look at what God designed and said, you know what, we can do better. This is the culture speaking. And then they proceeded to hand men a counterfeit. And a lot of guys have picked that counterfeit up because at least it was something. I mean, my dad didn't show me. My church hasn't shown me. The culture is at least offering me something. And so now they're carrying around this fake version of manhood, and they're wondering why things aren't working like they think they're supposed to work. Now, some of you in here are young, maybe in your 20s. You in your 20s? Not in his 20s, is he, Cal?
Not yet.
You're not that old? You got the maturity of a 20-year-old, though? I saw him eating donuts back there, and I thought, well, we have that in common. We're that mature together. All right, some of you are young, and you're starting to feel the pull, right? You're starting to feel like there's something that I'm supposed to be stepping into. Not really sure what it is yet. Not really sure what it looks like, but there's something that I know I'm designed for. There's a greater purpose, right? It's, for me, got to be more than just video games in the basement. There's got to be something. And maybe you're a little older, maybe you're midlife, right? Maybe not to the crisis yet, but closing in on it, starting to look at Corvettes a little bit. You have a wife, man, you got 3 kids, you got a mortgage, you got a job, you know you're the quintessential American man. But never once have you sat down and asked the question, what is God actually calling me to be in my home? What's God actually calling me to be in my career or in my life? Some of you are a little older, and we would like to think a little wiser. 60-somethings, used to think that was old. Now I'm looking forward to coming into my prime in my 60s. And maybe you're sitting there thinking, is it too late for me? It's not too late. So we're going to launch this morning and then spend over the next couple of months several Monday nights together in a series that we'll call Equipped. And this morning's really about setting the table for that. And we're going to name the problem. We're going to point to the design. We're going to introduce some equipment. And then we're going to call every man in this room to stand up and walk into or through what God has already prepared for us, because it's already prepared. So here's where we'll start, okay? And you can write this down if you're taking some notes. Otherwise, just use your photographic memories. You know, the same one that you use when your wife sends you to the store to get the list of 4 things. Use that same memory. And remember this, you're not too far gone. You're not hopeless. You're just not yet equipped. Okay? Now, if you go to the doctor, and the older you get, the more you probably should, the doctor isn't going to give you a prescription without a diagnosis. I mean, if he does, turn him in, he's probably going to jail. But no, the diagnosis comes before something's prescribed. And so it's the same with what we're doing this morning and into the next several weeks. We need to diagnose what is actually wrong, or what is actually going wrong, or what it maybe is, to say it a little more benignly, what's not quite going right, okay? Had a lot of conversations with a lot of men through the years, you know, in living rooms and parking lots and hospital waiting rooms and in my office at the church. And it's interesting, what I found in talking with men is that when they finally open up, like the facade comes down, when they jettison the costume, when they get real, when they set the armor down, when it all comes off and they stop performing, it's the same kind of things that come out over and over. It's things like, I just feel lost. I feel like I'm failing my family. I feel like I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. Or I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore. Now, these conversations are with men, many of whom attend church regularly. Some of them are leaders in their churches. Some of them are pastors of their churches. Some of them lead small groups or teach Sunday school. Some of them lead companies in the corporate arena. Here's the thing, the feelings don't discriminate. And I think what we need to recognize this morning is that this is not primarily a problem with motivation. It's not that these guys that I've had conversations with, and that you've probably had conversations with too, don't want to be all they can be or to be what God wants them to be. It's not about the motivation. It's not a motivation problem. Guys, it's a formation problem. These guys in these conversations were never equipped. They never learned how. And I think this problem shows up in a couple of different ways for us. And I think it's important that we kind of name both of them, because both of them destroy families and both of them very clearly dishonor God. So 2 areas of failure. Failure mode number 1 is passive drift. Maybe you've heard a term like that, passive drift. This is the guy who has physically shown up, but spiritually he's checked out, right? He's in the house, but he's not leading the house. He's going through the motions. He's watching life happen to him instead of moving through it with purpose and intention. He's typically a conflict avoidant guy. He's typically a comfort-addicted guy. Does this sound familiar? He's willing to let things slide because confronting them would cost him something. That's failure mode number 1, passive drift. Here's failure mode number 2, on the opposite end of the spectrum. This would be aggressive dominance, right? We know these guys, right? We've seen them. This is the man who got the memo that men are supposed to be strong. Sun's out, guns out. Somehow he got a corrupted version of that memo. And to him, strength manifests itself in control. Like, I need to control the situation. This makes me a strong man. And his leadership style is fear-based. He pushes, he demands, he intimidates. He mistakes volume, like yelling. He mistakes that for authority. And he uses force to garner some measure of respect from others for himself. And here's the thing, the people that are around him, whether it's his family or his employees or his friend group, if that even exists with this guy, they feel the weight of his presence as a burden rather than feeling his presence as a covering. This guy is not what God designed either. Now here's what these two have in common. Opposite ends of the spectrum, but both have this in common. Both of these men are unequipped. One swung to the left, one swung to the right, but both have missed the mark, right? And it's not because they're beyond hope. Okay, I don't want to talk about these things, and it's sort of negative to think about this, but I don't want us to believe the lie that we are beyond hope. Now, these guys are this way not because they're beyond hope, but because nobody has handed them the right tools. Right? Here's another thing that's important to know. The enemy, who is... Satan. I was going to say the Bears, but Satan, the Indiana Bears. Rich is excited to get another team in Indiana? I don't know. Or Rockford. Are they going to move to Rockford? I'm hearing all kinds of things. I heard Pekin made a, bid for, I don't know. The Pekin Bears.
It's okay, we'll beat Green Bay anywhere.
That's right, okay. The enemy is Satan. You were right. If you marked Satan on your paper, that was the correct answer. Put a gold star next to your name. Right, here's the thing. Satan knows what you could become. He knows. Like, Satan doesn't act in ways that are random. He attacks men not on accident, but with great purpose. He isn't just throwing darts hoping that something sticks. No, he's strategic. He has studied the design. He knows what God intends. And he also knows that when a man is properly formed and fully equipped, that he becomes dangerous. He becomes a useful instrument or weapon in the hands of God. And he becomes a protector and a provider, a spiritual anchor. A man who shapes the next generation. He becomes a man who leads his wife with sacrifice and his kids with great intention. So Satan, as the enemy, then targets our formation. That's what he does. He attacks at the source. He goes after the fathers. Why? Because he knows that broken fathers produce unformed and unequipped sons. Have we seen this? Fatherlessness is an epidemic, is it not, Ken? This is some of Ken's most amazing ministry work to the fatherless. But the devil knows. He's like, hey, if I can get the fathers derailed, if I can keep them from making the commitment to their personal formation, that's going to translate into sons that are exactly the same. He gets that. And then he goes after our marriages. Right? He knows that fractured homes produce confused kids. And he attacks us at church. Really? At church? Oh yeah, at church. At the pasture, we're very relational in our approach. Guess what the devil attacks? Relationship. Right? He attacks us at church. And he tries to strip the church of men who know what they believe and why they believe it. Right? And we see this all over. Men relegating spiritual formation and responsibility to the women. Show me in the Bible where that's the plan. It's not the plan. The devil knows it, so that's how he attacks us. The chaos that we see in our culture is not an accident. It's a coordinated attack by the devil. Attack on the formation of men. And the assault on it is getting bolder and bolder. It used to be these things were happening a little more covertly. Not anymore. Now this is the headline material. You look at the people that are getting elected to office. It's unbelievable. So this is where I'm at, and I hope that you're here with me. I'm not just going to sit idly by and watch this happen. Not at the pasture. Not in my own home. So let me ask you a very direct question. Maybe this is a gut check moment for you. Of those two failure modes, which is your tendency? Not somebody else's. What's yours? Are you the guy that drifts? Are you the guy that lets things slide to avoid the hard conversations because it's easier not to have them? Or are you the guy who has to have control, who thinks that strength means being the loudest or the most forceful dude in the room? Be honest. Don't say it out loud. I'm not asking you to raise your hand or anything like that, but you know. And naming it is kind of the first step. We can't fix what we won't face, right? But guys, we also need to know that there's grace. And here's what the grace looks like. It looks like this. It means just because we name a negative tendency today doesn't mean that we will have to be defined by it tomorrow. Okay, we can change. We can be transformed. We want things that we do as a part of the pastor ministry to be transformational in their nature. Fellowship's great. You know, fishing trips and farting contests, that's a lot of fun for men's ministry, but that's not what we're about. We're about transformation. And guys, God has made you for something, and he wants to form you into what he has made you for. Right? He's got a plan. Well, let's talk about that plan. Let's talk about the design. Here's a truth you might want to write down. Maybe it's not new to you, but it's kind of something that we don't think about often, especially in the society in which we live. Manhood is not something that we invent. Okay? Society is trying to reinvent manhood. Actually, what society is trying to do is eliminate manhood. Right? But we don't invent manhood. Manhood is something to be recovered. It's already been invented. Right? Think back with me to Genesis chapter 1. And I'm not going to ask you to turn there. We're not going to camp here for very long. But in Genesis, 1 through 3, we see the original blueprints. And before we look at our main text today, I think it'd be good for us just to talk about this for a second. Because if we don't know what we're designed for, it's going to be hard for us to know what we're aiming at. Yeah? So in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 28, the Bible says this, "And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." You know, this is like the theme verse for a lot of men's ministry. It's like, well, we got to go hunt something and kill something and catch something, and I'm all about all of that. So God created man in his own image. Okay, this is important. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. There it is. How many genders are there? Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion." Now, there's so many layers here. So much that we could talk about and study through. But for today, I just want to pull one thread. Okay? And here it is. The first command that God gave to man, it was a mandate. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't an invitation. It was a charge. It was a command. The first command that he gave to man was this: be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, have dominion. Now notice those words, guys. They're not passive words. These are active words. They're directional words. They assume initiative. They assume that authority is going to be exercised under God's authority. They assume a man who is moving, who is doing something with what he's been given. So from the very beginning, God did not design man to be a drifter. God did not design man to be passive and let the women folk do the heavy lifting, except for cleanup after the men's retreat, and we're able to do that. That wasn't God's design. Now this is important too. The image that Genesis talks about, the imago Dei, that's what theologians refer to it as, because they can't speak regular English, they have to use Latin and whatever. The imago Dei, which very simply is the image of God in man, that image was not eliminated at the fall. When Adam sinned, the image of God did not go away. Okay? It was marred. It was distorted. But here's the thing. The image of himself that God created and put into man was still the design. The capacity was still there. The calling still there. But now it takes work. It takes discipline. It takes community. It takes the power of the Spirit to reclaim what sin tried to ruin. Right? So it's not invented. It's recovered. The clearest picture that we have of what recovered manhood looks like, and when I say recovered manhood, what I mean is fully formed, fully equipped, perfectly calibrated man. The perfect and clearest picture, of course, is Jesus. Now, again, our churches through the years have often painted Jesus in a little bit different light. Like, you'll hear me to refer to the bouncing, behaving hair Jesus that's on the wall in the Sunday school classroom. A little effeminate, right? Or Jesus in a light blue bathrobe holding a lamp. Like nothing masculine about that. And he's just got soft, beautiful eyes, like he, walking the catwalk somewhere. That's not the Jesus of the Bible. Jesus, the man, the perfect image bearer of God, walked into rooms and things changed. Jesus walked into the temple and he turned some tables because the tables needed to be turned. Jesus wept in the Garden of Gethsemane, not because he was weak, but because of the unthinkable weight of what he was bearing. Carrying a load that's unimaginable to us. And it was real. And he carried it anyway. Jesus confronted religious leaders who were destroying people. He didn't let it slide, no passive drift with Jesus. No, he called it out. He told the truth when the truth was costly. He served when serving was beneath him by every earthly measure. And then, of course, he endured what no human being has ever endured. And I'm not just talking about the physical, which most of us could not bear up under, I'm certain, but also the spiritual. And here's the thing, Jesus, when he did that, he did it with his face set like flint. Jesus wasn't passive. On the other hand, Jesus wasn't overly aggressive, but what Jesus was, guys, was submitted. He was submitted to his Father. He was moved by love. He was clear in his purpose, and he was absolutely unafraid. That, gentlemen, is what an equipped man looks like. That's what we're building toward. We're not looking to clone anybody. We're not looking to adopt some sort of cultural ideal. We definitely don't need any more church performers. God knows there's plenty of that going around. What we're after is men who look into their own life, into their own context, and into their own families and say, I need to be like Jesus. That's what we're after. The series is really not about becoming a different kind of man. Okay, you may be thinking, oh yeah, I just need to be different. No, it's about becoming the man God already designed you to be. The design is there. You don't have to come up with it. You don't need to go to the drafting table and figure this out and sketch something out. No, the design is in place. We just have to step into it. We just need to pick up the equipment, and that's what we're going to talk about next. And finally, we're going to get to this text in 2 Timothy 2. Okay, so if you've got your Bible open, let your eyes fall to verse 1 of 2 Timothy 2, and we'll just start by reading this. This is the Apostle Paul. He's writing to a young man, Timothy, and Timothy is a young man who's under pressure. He's leading a hard church in a hostile city. And right in the middle of this letter, this second letter from Paul to Timothy, that's full of urgency, the Apostle Paul drops one of the most concentrated passages on masculine formation in the entirety of the New Testament. So let's read it. Beginning in verse 1, he says, "Ye then, my child," talking to Timothy, he says, "be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Share in the suffering as a good soldier of Christ Jesus. No soldier gets entangled in civilian pursuits, since his aim is to please the one who enlisted him. An athlete is not crowned unless he competes according to the rules. And it is the hardworking farmer who ought to have the first share of the crops. Think over what I'm saying to you, Timothy, for the Lord will give you understanding in everything, including these things. What is it that Paul is saying? Well, look at it in the very first verse. This is important. We can't gloss over this. He doesn't say, hey, be strong in your own willpower. He doesn't say, dig deep. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, be strong in your grit. He doesn't say, hey, just get your stuff together. Come on. No, he says this. Be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. So the strength that Paul is calling Timothy to is not manufactured inside of Timothy. It's received from outside of Timothy. It's grace that is rooted in something other than Timothy. It's Christ-centered. It's Spirit-sustained strength. So what does that teach us? Here's what it teaches us. The equipment that we're going to talk about and introduce in a second and talk about over the next couple of months, that equipment is not earned. It's not something we manufacture. It's not something we curate or create. Guys, it's issued. I know we got military guys in here. In the military, you go and they issue some things to you. Now, I'm always surprised at what you have to pay for out of your own pocket, but it's issued. Right? Like I don't have to make it. I don't have to show up and make my combat boots. No, they have combat boots for me and they issue them. Okay? The equipment that we need as men to be the men that God has called us to is not stuff that we have to figure out and design and create. No, it's stuff that God created and He's issuing it to you like a soldier. Okay? That's important for us to understand. And this is the theological backbone of everything that we're going to talk about over the next couple of months. God is not asking you to produce anything, especially that what you don't have. He's asking you to receive and walk in what He has already provided for us. Now, Paul uses three images in this passage to paint the portrait of an equipped man. He talks about a soldier. He talks about an athlete. He talks about a farmer. So let's just look at these very briefly. He says about the soldier, he says the soldier has to endure hardship as a good soldier. And then he says this, no one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life. So the soldier is single-minded. He's made a decision about what he is for, what he's here to do. And that decision is what organizes everything else. He doesn't try to run his civilian life and the mission at the same time. He's fully committed to the one who has enlisted him. And Paul says this also very plainly. He says the soldier endures hardship. He endures it. Guys, this isn't news to you, but this man stuff is hard. Yeah? It's hard to be a good husband, isn't it? It's hard to be a father. Jeff and I were just talking about how we were ready to abandon our kids and move to Florida. Maybe together. There's some good restaurants that we both enjoy down there, and we can just leave our kids to their own devices. Fatherhood is hard. Showing up and being a man of integrity is not easy. Following through on your promises is not easy. It's hard. War is hard. But the resistance is built into this design. It's hard for a reason. And what this resistance in our life, this difficulty that we have in stepping into our role as men, what it does is it builds character. This is where character is forged, guys, in the hard things. He talks about an athlete. Lots of athletes in here. or wannabe athletes. By the way, the gymnasium at the church is coming along nicely, so the geriatric basketball league, I'm sure, will be in full swing soon, right? Jeff, are you ready? Yep, he's got splints and all kinds of other things in his closet, ready for that league. Right? We all dream about ourselves as athletes, right? Some of us are living vicariously through our kids, or we did, or maybe our kids are graduated now, so we find another kid and we live vicariously through them, good athletes. But Paul talks about the athlete, and what does he say? He says if anyone competes in athletics, he's not crowned unless he competes according to the rules. What do we know about athletes? They're disciplined, right? In fact, the Greek root that Paul uses here is the word for agony. Right? You ever see a guy working out, maybe trying to get a personal best at the gym? You know, maybe they're squatting, whatever. What do you squat? Not in there, I mean in the gym. You squatted 500? I squat 500 when I get out of bed, that's nothing. Now, but let's just picture Hunter squatting 500 to 1,000 pounds, somewhere in there, in the gym. Now, the picture isn't this. He's under the bar and going down, and he's just grinning and smiling and just loving life. No, it looks like he's about ready to die. Guys working out look like they're in agony. You know why? Because they are in agony. If you're not in agony, your workout's not doing anything for you. Right? So it takes discipline. There's agony involved. And the athlete agonizes in the training so that when the moment in the competition finally comes, his body and his mind know what to do. They're trained, they're ready, they're equipped. Right? But notice there's a qualifier here that Paul puts in. He says, the athlete isn't crowned unless he plays according to the rules. So what does that tell us? It's not just effort, guys, but it's also integrity. Listen, you can fill your schedule and still be disqualified. Right? A man can be busy on the outside and broken on the inside where nobody sees. The third example, and again, many of you in here can relate to this, is the farmer. If you farm, you know this, but the farmer plays the long game, right? The farmer doesn't plant on Monday and say, well, I'll probably harvest on Friday. Right? I don't know what you're growing. If you're growing milkweed or something, maybe. But that's not how farming works. No, you put the seed in the ground and then you pray for rain, and then you cultivate, and maybe you spray. I don't know what your methodology is. I'm not a farmer. I cultivated corn one time for my father-in-law, and that was it. And I literally cultivated the corn. That's why I only did it one time. Right? But between the planting and the harvesting, there's a lot of mundane, sort of non-glamorous, not sexy work that has to be done. But if, as a farmer, you don't do that work faithfully, you will not harvest. Right? So farmers know this. But here's what a farmer also knows. If I do the work, harvest is coming. I have to be patient. I have to wait. I have to be consistent and faithful. But harvest is coming. Just not coming today. So a soldier, an athlete, a farmer, they're single-minded, they're disciplined, they're patient. This is the portrait of the equipped man, and every bit of it is held together by what we read in verse 1. Let's return back there. Be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus. So the strength to do these things, as a soldier, as an athlete, as a farmer, as a man, is not from us. It comes from Christ. Now, over the next couple of months at these Mondays for Men, we're going to talk about some specific things. And I'm just going to give you a little sort of teaser about the equipment that we're going to talk about. Okay, we're going to talk in week 1 about a tether. So what's a tether? Well, if we were to look at John 15, we would read the story about the vine and the branches. This is Guys, this is the most important thing. This is your personal connection to God. Are you personally connected to God? Some of us are personally connected to a lot of things. If we're getting World Cup soccer fans, man, you've watched every match, and you stay up late and you get up early to watch. You're connected to that. Or maybe you're connected to the outdoors, and being out in the woods is your favorite thing. And on your trail cameras now, you're starting to see these bucks in their velvet, and they're forming, and they're getting big, and your heart's racing, and you're ready to go. Or, you're out there and you're in the boat and you're catching fish, or maybe you're just totally stoked about the deal you're going to make at work. I don't know what it is, but we connect to a lot of stuff. The question that we have to wrestle with this morning is, how connected are we to God? You can't function without the tether. You can have biological maleness without it, but you cannot be God's man without God's connection. That's the tether. The second week, we're going to talk about the spine. 1 Corinthians 16:13, act like men. Right? Ironically enough, the way this falls out is this will be the Monday before the 1613 conference that we're live streaming at the church. By the way, that doesn't cost you anything. You need to be there. The speaker lineup is insane. And it's going to be about this, acting like men. It's going to be about cultivating godly manhood. But we'll talk about it. We're going to talk about courage. Not the kind that's loud and absolute, boisterous and just, no, the quiet, super hard steel, that kind of courage. The courage to stand firm when everything in you says, no, go ahead and fold it up. Week 3, we're going to talk about the altar. Genesis 22 and Romans 12 talk about surrender. Guys, the surrender has to come before the sending. You cannot be deployed until you've been laid down. And we're going to spend that week on what it means to be a man who lives his life on the altar. You say, well, my life is mine. I've worked hard. I've made a lot of things happen for myself. No, get on the altar. You're not your own. Week 4, we're going to talk about the basin. In John 13, we read the story of when Jesus wraps himself with a towel and he gets on his knees in front of the men who are about to abandon him. And he serves them by washing their feet. We're going to talk about why the strongest men in the room are usually the ones who serve the best and the most. Week 5 will be a discussion about a shield. The armor of God, Ephesians 6. A shield of faith to protect and to absorb. Listen, the devil is throwing all kinds of fiery darts at us as men. Agreed? I mean, it's coming at you from every direction, whether it's lust or whether it's worldly pursuits or whatever. We need that shield. We're going to talk about that. Week 6, we're going to talk about a compass. We can't live life without direction and purpose, and yet so many men are beating their heads against the wall, trying to make a go of it, white-knuckling their way through life without any purpose or any direction. And we're going to address what happens when a man has no vision, no direction, no North Star, if you will. We're going to talk about what it looks like to find yours and mine. Week 7, we'll finish up talking about a sword. Again, Ephesians 6, the armor of God. The Word of God. In your mouth. In your mind. This is the only offensive weapon in this whole list. And we're going to talk about what happens when a man actually knows his Bible. Not just owns one, but knows it. Say, well, my wife got, Not your wife's job to know the Bible for you. It's your job. We're going to step up. So 7 weeks or so. 7 pieces of equipment. It starts today. Let me tell you a little story. There's a guy I know of. We'll just call him David. That's your name. I'm not talking about you. It's no Davids in this room. There are Davids in this room, but it's not one of you. Not going to make any eye contact with Dave Shippert. It's not about him. I'm just going to call this guy David. David was raised by a father who was either absent or angry. Not good options, right? He's either not there or he's yelling and screaming. David got married at a young age. He had kids really fast. Now, David was a hard worker. But by the time David was 38 years old, his wife was about to leave him. And his oldest kid had stopped talking to him altogether. One night, he was sitting in his pickup truck in a parking lot at about 9:30 at night, and all he could think about was, I just don't want to go home. Just don't want to. At the invitation of a friend, David agreed to go to a men's group at a church. For 6 weeks, David sat there in the men's group. He didn't say anything. Didn't really engage that way. He just kind of sat there. Until ultimately, one week, the leader looked at him and asked him a direct question. Awkward. But David decided to answer, and when he started to answer, he just sort of broke open and gushed. And what was coming out of David's mouth was not anger. It was abject grief. See, David had never been equipped. He'd never had a man put his hand on his shoulder and say, hey, listen, here's where you are and what you are, and here's what God has designed you to be, and here's how we get you there. He'd never had anybody like that. Nobody that really cared enough to make that kind of an investment. And now here he is at this men's Bible study group, and he's puked it all over the table. And apparently the men responded. 3 years later, David was walking his daughter down the aisle. She was getting married, and when David and his daughter got to the front of the church, and before he gave his daughter's hand to her future husband to be married, he turned to the crowd, probably much to the embarrassment of his daughter. Right? You ever put your kids in that position? It's like, Dad wasn't scripted to say anything. But there he goes, right? But David turned and he faced the crowd and he said this. He said, I almost missed this. I almost let the enemy have my family. But Jesus didn't let me. Guys, that's what equipped men do. David hadn't been equipped, but then he went to this men's meeting and apparently was surrounded by men who were ready to invest, ready to equip, ready to encourage. And so David, newly equipped, he stopped the bleeding. He broke the generational curse, if you will. This is what men do. They stop the bleeding. They take back ground that the enemy has claimed. They reclaim the ground. They change the trajectory of their family line.
Again, an unequipped man is not a hopeless man, but he's a man who hasn't picked up what's already been issued to him. Right? That's so many of us. But guys, we're not here disqualified. The equipment is waiting for us, but the equipment is for the willing. Now, you might be sitting here doing math in your head. I don't know if you're that kind of a guy or not. Maybe you're running some numbers. Maybe you're just contemplating some of what we've talked about. Maybe you're thinking, how bad have I been? Or maybe you're thinking, how many times have I failed my family, or at my job, or at my church, or how long have I been passive, or how much damage has my authoritarian persona done? Or maybe you're thinking, am I too late? Am I too old? Am I too broken? Or does this even apply to me? Or am I just kind of exempt, beyond reach, beyond hope? And somewhere in that math or in that conversation this morning, the enemy is whispering to you, yeah, you're right, you don't qualify for this. This is for better men than you. This is what he's telling you. Or maybe he's saying, hey, you're not there, you're not ready for this yet. Go get your act together and then come back and we can talk about, enlisting you in the program here. This is the devil talking, and I'm here to tell you this morning, guys, those are lies. They're lies. The devil's a liar. If we were to turn to Luke 22, and I'm, again, not going to ask you, but Jesus is in the upper room. It's the night before the crucifixion. The disciples are there. I mean, they're all about to fail spectacularly. What a nice dinner this must have been for Jesus. I mean, Judas is about to betray Jesus. Peter's about to deny him 3 times, and I think the rest of the guys are, lacing up their tenny runners because they're going to hit the bricks in a few minutes. The thing is that Jesus knows this. Right? He knows it. He knows exactly what's about to happen. And in Luke 21, verses 31 and 32, he says this to Peter. Okay? I don't know if I would have wanted to been Peter with Jesus in this moment. He says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. Anybody want to hear that from Jesus? Wow. But Peter swallowed hard. But Jesus wasn't done. He says this. He says, but I have prayed for you. Jesus praying for Peter. I've prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. Now catch every layer of that, guys. First, Jesus is saying, Satan's demanding to have you. Jesus is acknowledging that the spiritual warfare that's happening around Peter's life, it's real. Jesus is saying, I know that the devil has put the crosshairs on your back, Peter. I know it. I know that the enemy has a plan for your destruction, Peter. But then Jesus says, but I prayed for you. Not, hey, I'll pray for you if you just kind of hold it together. Hang in there, buddy. I'll throw one up for you. No, before the failure, before the denial, before Peter stood at the fire in the courtyard and said 3 times, I don't know this dude. Jesus had already prayed for him. He was interceding for Peter before he fell. Let that sink in. Now, Jesus knew Peter was going to fail, and Jesus prayed for him anyway. He didn't pray around the failure. He wasn't like, don't want to mention that. No, he prayed through it. He says, my prayer for you, Peter, is that your faith won't fail. Now, that didn't mean that Peter wasn't going to stumble, because Peter obviously stumbled. But what it meant was the foundation was going to hold even when Peter fell. And then Jesus says this, and this is the part that probably should wreck us in the most amazing of ways. Okay, think about this. Jesus is like, the devil's coming for you, dude. I'm praying for you that your faith won't fail, but I know you're going to fall. But then he says this, okay, it's looking dark, and then a ray of sunshine breaks through. Jesus says this, and when you have turned again, in other words, when you have returned, when you have gotten up after your failure, he doesn't say if, he says when you have turned again. I have a mission for you. I want you to go strengthen your brothers. So Jesus looked at a man who was about to deny him 3 times, and he said, hey, listen, you're going to come back. You're going to be back. And when you come back, I'm going to send you to strengthen other men. This is Peter. He's the denier. He's the one who cut off the soldier's ear and then took off running out of the garden, right? He's the one who stood by the fire and swore that he didn't know Jesus. If you flip the pages back a few to the book of Acts, you find Peter preaching the first Christian sermon. And what's happening? 3,000 people are coming to Jesus. That's redemption, guys. If anybody qualified as a washed-up schmuck, it was Peter. He's a Christ denier, and yet a few chapters later, he's preaching the gospel, and God is using him to effect transformation in the lives of 3,000 men. Now that's amazing. You think there's no hope for you? Stop thinking that. Stop thinking that. God has a plan. He has issued some equipment, and we'll work through that. I want to tell you one more story in closing. You're probably familiar with the account. And maybe you're sitting here this morning, and there's a version of yourself that you kind of know that this is what I'm supposed to become, what I'm supposed to be doing, and you've given up. Don't give up. Don't give up. Here's the story. There's a man by the name of William Wilberforce. You've heard of him? Yeah? William Wilberforce was a young man. He was a winner by every standard of the world. Parliamentarian, politician. Described himself as a man who enjoyed a life of leisure and pleasure. But Wilberforce had an encounter with Jesus and ultimately gave his life to Christ. And when he did so, he decided that it would probably be best for him to jettison the filthy world of politics in which he was used to operating and isolate himself and focus on his relationship with Jesus, which sounds really admirable. Wilberforce had a mentor named John Newton. You've heard of John Newton? John Newton wrote the beloved hymn, Amazing Grace. And John Newton, as you may know, was a former slave trader. And he was a mentor to Wilberforce. And one day he sat Wilberforce down and he said, "William, God has made you who you are. And God has placed you where you are with a purpose." And then he said simply this: do not abandon the post. And so Wilberforce took Newton's counsel to heart, and he stayed in politics. And for 20 years straight, every year, he introduced a bill in Parliament for the abolition of the slave trade. 20 years. And then finally, the bill passed. Wilberforce won. What's interesting is that 3 days after the passing of that legislative bill in Parliament, Wilberforce died. And the lesson for us this morning, guys, as we think about the inflection point of history, the inflection point of our church, the pastor, the inflection point that maybe you find yourself in your marriage or with your children or with your grandchildren or on your job or whatever, the thing that we need to focus on is that God has made us who we are. He's given us what we need. The equipment is there. He's issued it. We've got to pick it up so that we can be who He intended for us to be in our homes, in our church, in our contexts, our places of work. There's a post to be stood. There's a job to be done, and the devil says, forget about it. Just go do your own thing. Guys, do not abandon the post. We cannot afford to abandon the post. None of us. So, I don't really know what the rest of the day looks like except smash burgers. As soon as that was said, I didn't hear anything else. And I'm a little bit of a run and gun, preach and go kind of guy today because I have a wedding to do this afternoon. And we're going to enjoy some fellowship and some food, and that's great, but let me encourage you guys. Take a minute, take some time to contemplate this stuff, this man stuff. Go ahead and have a conversation with somebody. Go ahead and start to exercise yourself in transparency. Go ahead and own some things. This is as safe a place as any. There's like no women here to repeat anything that's said. Or to tell you didn't say it exactly right or whatever. But we got to get serious. There's so much that depends on it. Not the least of which is your family, your wife, and your kids. We can break the curse generationally, right? Or we can just sit by idly and watch things degrade and devolve, right? Hoping that, somebody invents some magic pill that turns males to men. No, the prescription is already in place. We just need to submit and pick up the tools. Can I pray for us?